Right, everybody. Welcome to our first session of summer school at the Environmental Law Institute. My name is Madison Calhoun. I'm the Senior Manager of Educational Programs here at ELI. So this is our very first session of summer school, Intro to Careers in Environmental Law and Policy. Thank you so much for coming out with us today, and thank you so much for our speakers for being here. The series is aimed at folks who do not already have a strong background in environmental law. Anyone is welcome to attend our summer school sessions, but we often do get a lot of law students, undergraduate students, and graduate students. No matter your background, we encourage everyone to come out and attend these. So we'll have 3 sessions of summer school in person this year. There'll be the environmental law session, or the Careers in Environmental Law session that you're all at now. We'll also have a land use and energy law session in person on June 22nd. And then at the end of July, we'll have our hazardous waste and sites session in person. The rest will all be online. So every Thursday except for June 29th, which we're taking a break that day. So please register on ELI's website for the rest of them. If you're interested, we would love to have you. Our other 5 sessions, the ones that are offered via webinar, will be recorded and posted to the website, as well as our in-person sessions. So if you can't make it to one, feel free to watch it back later. And all the sessions are free, but please do register so we know that you're coming and so that you get all of the relevant information for them. So now we'll go ahead and kick off our first session of summer school. So today's session is an introduction into careers, and we have a wonderful group of leading experts here to tell you about their journeys in environmental law and share advice with all of you. This will be more of a roundtable discussion format, so I'll be leading a discussion. We'll hold time at the end for audience questions, so please think of questions, and then we'll ask you at the end to raise your hands and bring a microphone around. And we will try to end a little bit early so that we have time for networking as well, if you'd like to speak with our wonderful panelists today. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. I usually read introductions at the start of each session of summer school, but given today's topic, I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves. So our first question is, could you please introduce yourself and tell our audience about your career journey so far? What made you interested in pursuing a career in environmental law? And we'll start with Jared Page, the staff attorney here at ELI.
Hi, everybody. So glad to have you here, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. As Madison said, my name is Jared Page. I'm a staff attorney at the Environmental Law Institute. Just briefly, the Environmental Law Institute, we're a research and education institute, looking at sort of solving tough environmental problems with innovative solutions. So how did I get my start in environmental law? How did I make my way here? It's a somewhat circuitous path. I think there's some people who sort of manage to find out what they want to do when they're 5 years old and sort of pursue that with steadfast determination all the way through their career. And that was not me. I actually grew up wanting to be a dentist of all things. And my first day of college advising, they laid out what classes I was needing to take to become a dentist. And I immediately decided to switch to history. Okay, so you can see how sort of tightly I held on to that dream. So growing up, I had sort of always been interested in the outdoors. My family took a trip up to the Lake Superior, Michigan, every year, and I always had a sort of close connection with the wilderness. But I found myself in history. So taking classes in University of Wisconsin, and found my way to art history, actually. Graduated with a degree in art history, decided I wanted to sort of pursue a graduate degree in that topic. That was sort of the best way to find a job and a career with that major. So I did that. I spent 2 years getting a graduate degree from the University of Kansas in art history, studying Dutch art of the 15th and 17th century. And I know you're all thinking, okay, well then how does he figure his way into the Environmental Law Institute? So I moved out to Washington, D.C., and I got a job actually just 2 doors down at the National Geographic Museum. And so that was a way to sort of use some of my skills and knowledge that I had learned in art history, but also marry it with some of my interests in the outdoors. But I worked there for about 4 or 5 years and kind of made my way maybe to the top of where I could in my trajectory. So I was like, well, what else can I do? I think I want to do something else with my career and with my life. And I had been reading a lot in the National Geographic magazine about climate change. I was aware of that, but knew it was a sort of pressing issue of our time. And so decided to go back to school and sort of do something with the environment, but I didn't know what that meant yet. So I actually went back to the University of Maryland to get a Bachelor of Sciences degree to sort of get some of that science coursework that I had immediately dismissed my first day of college. And that was really formative. So at the University of Maryland, I sort of got in touch with a few professors there who helped crystallize my thinking around what I might want to do in the environment. And I had never considered law or law school or being a lawyer as something I'd be interested in. No lawyers in my family, hadn't been exposed to, the law at all. But I realized after talking more to some of my professors and who became a mentor to me that policy and law was a really good way to sort of maybe achieve some of the things I was hoping to achieve with my interests. And so I finished my Bachelor of Science at Maryland. I took the LSAT and applied to law schools. I went to GW, just here in town, and went there with a dedicated focus to work on environmental law. So sort of took every opportunity I could throughout law school to do that. And that included working on the Journal of Environment and Energy Law, helping write notes and helping students write their notes on environmental topics. I pursued a research assistantship with one of the professors there, Rob Glicksman, which resulted in a article we co-authored on adaptive management and the National Environmental Policy Act. I also sort of took advantage of all the externships that were available in law school, and I actually did a clerkship here at the Environmental Law Institute between my second and third year of law school. And that was really when I knew Environmental Law Institute was the type of place that was doing the work that I wanted to do. And so after law school, applied for a fellowship here at ELI, got the fellowship, and then sort of continued on as a staff attorney. And then I've been a staff attorney here for almost 3 years. Here at ELI, I work on several projects, both domestic and international law. Sort of the largest project I work on, and the one I spend most of my time on, is the Climate Judiciary Project, training state and federal judges about climate science and the law. I also work on issues of coastal resilience, natural infrastructure, and public lands resource management. So a long circuitous route, but I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you all today.
Thank you so much, Jared. Our second speaker today is Margaret Ann Hill, who's a partner at Blink Rose. So I'll consider
Yes.
you.
Good afternoon to everybody. Also a pleasure to sit here and talk to you about environmental law. I've been practicing now for a long time, for 39 years in environmental law, and have done pretty much almost everything you can do in that area. Like Jared, it was interesting hearing your story. I also have a very circuitous route in that, similar to you, I didn't know anybody who was a lawyer growing up. Didn't have anybody that could mentor me. I did know that I was interested in law. For some reason, watching television, whatever, it just seemed like, oh, wow, that looks pretty interesting. Didn't want to be a dentist, but so anyway, went to college, got out of college. And at that time, wasn't really sure about going to law school. So I ended up going to graduate school in Northeastern in Boston, and got a master's in political science, and was also trying to figure out, okay, now where do I go from here? And at that time, a former oil corporation, you may have seen the signs around for it still because somebody bought the name to it. They divested some time ago, but a company by the name of Gulf Oil Corporation. They operated in Pittsburgh. They were headquartered in Pittsburgh. And after getting my graduate degree, I decided that I was really interested in working for an international company because I was interested in politics, government relations, international relations. And since Gulf was located all over the world, I thought, wow, that'd be a great company to work for. And they happened to be hiring at that time. So I applied for a position there, and I ended ultimately in a really unique position, not intending to have this position, but it was really unique in that I was on the floor of the senior executive, where basically what I did and 3 other people that work with me we evaluated what to do with assets worldwide, basically looked at corporate strategy. I happened to be assigned to two what they call strategy centers, which were subsidiaries. The one subsidiary was Gulf Oil Exploration and Production, and the other one was Gulf Mineral Resources. So totally involved in activities that relate to environmental law and to environmental regulation. So I became immersed in understanding about everything with respect to environmental law, because obviously that's going to impact a corporate strategy. For example, back then, one of the things that I was very involved with was offshore oil leasing off the coast of California, and working with some of our state and federal lobbyists, not only in California, but also here in the district in terms of for example, bills, riders that were being added onto appropriations bills to stop offshore leasing. So it was really everything and anything. And I also got involved in nuclear energy because Gulf did have a nuclear subsidiary at the time. And they also had uranium mines, they had coal mines. So there was so much stuff going on with respect to environmental law that I realized I definitely had an interest. Now, concurrently, what I didn't mention was I started going to law school at night. It was a full-time evening program at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. So as I was working at Gulf in that area and the corporate strategy group and learning, law, I thought, wow, this would be something I'd be interested in. Gulf actually fell apart, the first oil company to do so, one of the big majors anyway, back in '84. And their assets were sold off to Chevron. And I ended up trying to figure out, okay, now where? I've been here for 8 years, now what do I do? So the Department of Justice, of course, was taking off in terms of enforcement of environmental laws at that time, and they were hiring here in the district. So I was hired by Department of Justice, and I came down here and I worked for several years at Department of Justice. And the interesting thing there is, first of all, for anybody that's interested in practicing environmental law, great opportunity at DOJ, because you really do everything and anything. And all the government agencies are your clients. So EPA would be our client, Department of Interior would be our client, et cetera. So that was really a fascinating time. And while I was at DOJ, I was given the opportunity to do appellate court arguments, appellate briefs, work with the Solicitor General's office, or what we refer to as the SG's office, in terms of preparing cases to go to the Supreme Court. Also, I got a chance, you're not supposed to when you're at DOJ, but I was up on the Hill a lot, trying to make provisions to the Superfund statute at that time, the amendments to Superfund in '86. So I was doing lobbying basically on the Hill and doing a lot of other work, policy work to a DOJ. Decided that I wanted to pursue more litigation than what I was actually doing. I was doing some litigation, but I wasn't doing as much as I wanted to. So I went to a private firm here in the district. And then ultimately worked here in a private firm for about 12 years, and then ultimately moved up to Philadelphia to work for Blank Rome. And I've been doing pretty much everything and anything in environmental law, and you'll probably hear everybody talk about it today, but it encompasses many different areas. So some of the background in terms of what I've been doing, transactions, litigation, compliance work, and I'm still doing some lobbying for some time, but that's how I got to where I am.
Thank you so much. Up third is Eric Fetterman, who's an attorney advisor at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA. And thanks over to you.
Yeah, thanks, and hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you today. Like Madison said, my name's Eric, and I'm a lawyer at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of the General Counsel. I'll talk a little bit about how that organization structure, I think later in my introduction, but I've been there about 3 years. I also had kind of a circuitous, aimless path to the law. I thought I'd have a unique story up here, but I guess it's the norm. Unlike Jared, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college, but I found myself studying history and classical literature. So I did a lot of Greek and Latin and Roman history, and graduating, I decided I wanted to pursue a graduate degree, maybe be an archaeologist. But I spoke to a lot of people in the field, and they said that I should take a couple of years and make sure that's really what I wanted to do. So After college, I taught English in Spain for a couple of years, kind of sit and think about my future. And during that time, decided that I wanted to do something with my career that gave me the opportunity to have more of an impact on the current day. And I think I was resigned to the law, given the skill set that I developed in college. It seemed like the only thing that I could do with kind of the emphasis on research and writing that I developed. So after those 2 years, I decided to apply to law school and was lucky enough to be accepted to Harvard. So I started law school in 2015, and even then didn't really have a clear picture of what I wanted to do with a law degree, just that I wanted to be in the public sector somewhere. Very quickly though, after I started, I realized that environmental law was really interesting to me, and it gelled with personal interests. Like Jared, I also spent a lot of time in the outdoors as a kid, and was passionate about conservation and natural resource management. And as I started taking classes on environmental law, I learned that I really liked the people that I was taking those classes with and that were teaching them, but also that I found the subject really stimulating, and that it was something I found compelling. So in law school, I tried to take all the classes that were available to me in environmental law, including administrative law. And I also really tried to prioritize kind of experiential learning. So I was able to spend some time in clinics in law school. Both there was an environmental law specific clinic that I spent a semester in, but Harvard also had a food law and policy clinic that I spent some time in, which had a lot of crossover with environmental law and environmental justice. I spent my first summer, well, I spent both summers interning at nonprofits. The first summer in Philadelphia for an organization called the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia, which is kind of a small regional impact litigation shop that does do some environmental justice work, but does a lot of other stuff as well. And then my second summer, I spent with Earth Justice in their Northern Rockies office in Bozeman, Montana. I also did kind of a mid-semester externship with the Department of Justice's Environment and Natural Resources Division. Let's see, I graduated in 2018 and didn't have a job. Well, I did have a job. I didn't have like a career job. I clerked for 2 years, first on the Supreme Court for the state of Alaska, and then for the district court in Anchorage. So I had 2 years in Anchorage. And then I had to start thinking about kind of where to go after that. I knew that I wanted to do environmental law in the public sector, but maybe we'll cover this later, but it can be a little overwhelming and hard to find a job. So I applied all over the place, including to DOJ, which did not accept me. And ended up actually being referred to NOAA's Office of General Counsel by a professor that I'd taken some classes with. And I didn't know a ton about NOAA, although living in Alaska, I had started to appreciate how big of a role the agency has in many things, including fishery management, which is a big issue up there, and kind of weather data, weather forecasting, and climate study. So I was accepted into NOAA General Counsel's honors program, which hires people either straight out of law school or a couple years out of law school like me, who had clerked or had other fellowships. And the way the program is structured, well, let me take a step back. NOAA is a really big organization. They do a lot of stuff. They're a bureau of the Department of Commerce, so they're not their own agency. But NOAA itself has a super broad mission. I don't even know all the things that they do. It ranges from fishery management to weather satellites, And the Office of General Counsel, to track that, is very broad as well, and is split into 13 different sections, each of which works with its own set of kind of NOAA program clients. The way that the honors program is structured, when you're hired into the organization, for the first 18 months that you're there, you do 3 6-month rotations. This all sounds very complicated, in different GC sections. So over the course of those 18 months, I spent time working with the National Marine Fisheries Service, which implements the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is the big fishery management statute, and also implements NOAA's responsibilities under the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I also spent time with NOAA GC's international section, which kind of represents the whole agency on any number of international law issues, and also supports NOAA's participation in international treaty bodies like the International Maritime Organization. And I spent time also with the Oceans and Coast section, which is where I was assigned permanently and where I work today, which primarily advises the National Ocean Service, which itself has a bunch of program offices and has a very broad mission. But I'd say the client that I spend the most time working with is the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, which administers kind of a system of marine protected areas across the nation. And a lot of really interesting legal issues are associated with that. So I'm excited to talk more about that, I think, later, and to share my story with you all.
You are getting a very broad view of career paths. I'll tell you that right now. My name is Linda Fisher. It's also a pleasure to be here. I graduated from Miami of Ohio, also a history major, and loved policy and politics growing up, and came to Washington and got a job on Capitol Hill. And I did that for 5 or 6 years, and realized that to advance my career, I needed to go to law school. But I was also, as so many staffers on Capitol Hill are, was bitten with a political bug and thought I might want to run for Congress. So I went to Ohio State, which is Columbus is my hometown. Worked on a couple of local campaigns while I was going to law school, and realized I loved public policy, but I hated campaigning. And so I graduated. We're going to talk about networking as part of the panel, and had a job with a small law firm in Columbus. Did not get I was a clerk. I did not get a full-time job because, wait for it, I was a woman, and they weren't hiring women at that point. So connected back up with an old boyfriend in Washington, and he said, I think I know of an opening at EPA. EPA had just let a lot of political people go. I had Republican credentials, and they were looking to hire people. And I took the job at EPA. I had an introduction to environmental law working with the Energy and Commerce Committee, but I hadn't come out of law school with any classes, partly because the laws were so fresh. They really weren't teaching a lot of environmental law at the time. Like Peg and I finally figured out where I knew your name. It was working on Superfund amendments in 85 to 87 or 86. I was chief of staff to the administrator of EPA, and I did a lot of legislative work. Spent 2 years with her colleagues at the Department of Justice pushing amendments through the law, through the Congress, which I think really set up the practice of environmental law for years to come. I stayed at EPA. The Republicans continued to win the administration. So after being chief of staff, I ran the policy office for a couple of years. Then I became the assistant administrator of, at the time it was called the Pesticides and Toxic Substances office. And then the Democrats took over, and I spent 2 years at a law firm because I decided I really did need to punch the ticket for the career path I had started out in. While I was at Latham & Watkins, one of my clients approached me about
coming to work for them. It was Monsanto, and I was hired to run their government affairs program. I then left Monsanto. They merged with somebody, and it was a good time to leave. And got hired back when George W. became president as deputy administrator at EPA. So in and out of government and the private sector. I left after 2 years and took a year off, spent some time with my kids, and got approached by DuPont. And at DuPont, I was hired as, according to headhunters, I was the first chief sustainability officer at any Fortune 500 company. And that was, it was fun to be in kind of a path-breaking role in corporate America. I also ran the safety, health, and environmental programs for DuPont, as well as the sustainability programs. I retired from there about 5 or 6 years ago and have been serving on boards of directors ever since. So kind of a checkered path. An environmental law. Somebody asked me the other day about administrative law and my experience with administrative law. And I laughed and said, I never took, it was actually the dean of Ohio State Law School, that's his area of expertise. And I said, you know, I did a lot of administrative law, writing laws, reading regulations, signing off on things, but I never took admin law. I learned it on the job. So thank you. Do you have a normal path?
Relatively speaking, it's a straight shot. Or at least to the law, but not necessarily to environmental law. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roy Prather. I'm a partner at Beveridge and Diamond, which is the oldest and largest law firm dedicated exclusively to practicing environmental law. So it's all that we do. In terms of my legal career, however, basically, I knew I was going to be a lawyer probably the time I was in high school or something. At least that's what I had an inkling. When I went to college, I went to the University of Pennsylvania and was an international relations major, which was basically history, economics, and political science. So a little bit of a trend there. But coming through university, I basically had already determined, I didn't know what I'd be doing, but I just liked the idea of the law because over the course of college, it became clear to me that it touches everything. And so even though I didn't know yet what I wanted, I knew I'd be able to find something that fit an interest. And so I went directly from undergrad to law school. I attended Georgetown. And while there, I did not take a single course on environmental law, even though it has an entire environmental law program. I did take admin law. But basically I knew from that experience, after spending a summer at the public defender's office in Atlanta, which is where I'm from originally, that I did not want to do criminal. And then I spent another summer at a law firm in Philadelphia that I enjoyed a great deal, and they gave me an opportunity to kind of experience a wide range of things. And I realized I definitely want to litigate. And so knowing that, and it being 2008, and the basically economy was crashing and they were still willing to hire me, I basically held on for dear life and jumped to Reed Smith in Philadelphia, coming out of law school. When I went there, I went into their commercial litigation group, which is basically just the litigators for the entire firm. So I did everything. I did labor and employment, I did intellectual property, I did no environmental. Well, no, I had one super fun case, but I was so junior that I only did like some very limited research, and so I just didn't get a real good exposure to it. But got a ton of litigation experience. And ultimately, after 4 or 5 years, I relocated to the Baltimore area because my wife was doing residency at Hopkins, and realized I wanted to specialize more. I didn't want to just do every other kind of litigation you could think of, and started thinking about what I actually had an interest in specializing in. And I had been doing a lot of patent litigation at the time, mind you, with no science background whatsoever. I actually avoided taking math at all while I was in undergrad, music theory, which was the hardest class I ever took. So it was a terrible idea. But basically, I just started asking around, and people mentioned networking before, but talking to people in various capacities, various roles. And I realized in the patent litigation that I did, what I enjoyed the most, and maybe it's because I didn't have a science background, is I was the person who worked with the engineers and translated to the judge, because most of the time, those people were political science and history people, right? So I could take that very complicated computer science or chemistry issue, and after a lot of studying, finally say, I think I have a general idea how this works, and then explain it to them. And after talking to a wide range of folks about what I might be able to do, one of the people I spoke to was the chair of Beverage and Diamond at the time, Ben Wilson. And basically he, said, we actually have a need for some associates with a lot of litigation experience. Would you be interested in environmental law? I hadn't really given it much thought, so he gave me some reading to do. He said, here, read this. Here's the kind of things that we do. Let me know if you have interest. And so basically, after looking at the cases, reading more cases, I generally, had awareness of, as everyone, generally does, like climate issues, issues related to scarcity, issues related to drinking water, right? Like I had visibility into those issues, but never really dug into them. But what really stood out to me was two things. A lot of the litigation that I had done largely involved fights about moving money around, right? Who's going to pay this other person money because business didn't go the way they planned? Who owes who what, that kind of thing. And which is fine, don't get me wrong. But in terms of like broader impact that you might have with the work you do, sometimes it can be a little bit limited, right? And so in the environmental context, it gave me this opportunity to kind of marry the technical piece of things that I really enjoyed with the intellectual property work that I was doing, and do work and advise on issues that I could see a direct connection to, how people's lives are impacted, right? And so I kind of took a little bit of a leap of faith and said, sure, I'll take this on, and knowing there was going to be a steep learning curve because I hadn't read a word of the Clean Air Act. I knew the term Superfund, but I had no idea of the 10,000 acronyms and abbreviations that exist when you start talking environmental. Or even just happy agencies that touch it, right? So I joined Beverage and Diamond and have basically been practicing there for the last nearly 10 years now. Became a partner there. Maybe after 4 or so years, I was finally able to tell people that I was an environmental lawyer and actually be confident in saying that. And since then, my practice has been not just litigation, but expanded to include, compliance counseling, which I get a lot of interesting exposure to. I mean, within probably a couple of weeks of being at Beverage and Diamond, I was in Maryland at a paper making facility, like with a hard hat and boots, like walking through, and they're showing me their process and how they dispose of their waste, and what things they're going to need to factor into the renewal of their discharge permit, like all of these things. And so it's always something new that I get to learn, and then at the same time also be in the room to help weigh in on really critical issues, both for their businesses, for municipalities, and for the people that live in the vicinity of where they operate. And on that last piece, my practice, I'd say over the last 5 years or so, had really expanded on that compliance piece to really focus heavily on environmental justice, right? Which for me personally had a connection just with respect to issues that my own family faced, being in Mississippi and other locations. And so it offered a great opportunity for me to advise, raise the visibility of certain issues that many times organizations have considered or factored in, but not always necessarily with the lens that I think captures some of the nuances that are necessary to really make sure you're effectively addressing concerns of the community where you are, because there's no one size fits all as it pertains to a lot of those issues. And that led to me also going and teaching a course at Georgetown on environmental justice. And so I've kind of gone full circle, and it's really just been an amazing experience.
Thank you all so much for sharing your journeys. I think the audience can tell how many different paths there are into environmental law. And so now we'll kind of move on to also all of the many different things you can do while practicing environmental law and how varied it is. So could you all speak about what a typical day at your job looks like? And in any order, whatever.
I'll jump in. Only because I went back and I was looking at my, one of the things you have to do is as an attorney at a law firm anyway, is you have to keep time. Really, bothersome, but it's important because you have to bill clients, and that's how the firm makes money. So in any event, when I went back and I was looking at my timesheet, because I know I do a lot of different things during the day, and I was thinking, if I could explain to you what a typical day might look like in terms of what I might do. Can't mention any client names, obviously, but I just went back and I looked at May 1. What did I do? I negotiated a feasibility study language under Superfund with EPA Region 2 regarding a Superfund site up in upstate New York. So it's a site that's been going on literally, it's been contaminated for 50 years, but the cleanup's been going on for about 25. We just got to the point where we're actually negotiating a feasibility study in order to get to what they call record of decision, which means, or tells you exactly how you're going to clean up the site. So those negotiations have been fairly intense. So I did that. The next thing I did was I have been working with some consultants in terms of properties in California about trying to figure out how are we going to sell those properties. The properties are contaminated. So working with engineers, consultants, trying to figure out what's the strategy we're going to use in this transaction in order to sell these properties on the sell side. What's going to impact the buyer? What is the buyer going to be concerned about? What are we going to do to preserve the value of the property and minimize the risk to the seller? We're representing the seller. So those were further discussions with engineers, consultants. I was also negotiating with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which is New York's EPA, on a site in the Kill Van Kull, which is a very contaminated river in terms of benthic organisms and what our client might need to do in terms of cleaning up sediment in the Kill Van Kull. And also, the legitimacy of that. Is that really something that we should be doing in this, from my perspective, in this postage stamp size area of a harbor and an entire river where there's a lot of activities going on, and also a river that was impacted significantly by Superstorm Sandy. So that was the other thing I did. We also represent a couple lettuce companies, which we would think environmentally friendly lettuce company. It's all organic. However, that day I was trying to come up with some resolutions for wastewater treatment because we're having issues in terms of nutrients that are generated as a result of lettuce production, and trying to figure out how we're going to manage offsite wastewater because right now where we're discharging into a publicly operated treatment works, they're claiming that we're impacting it. So I work with lettuce companies on various sites around the country. Also working with OSHA, negotiating with them on a parking garage collapse in New York City, which came down. Unfortunately, someone died during the collapse. There's now an ongoing OSHA investigation, so I worked on that. I also worked on a portfolio transaction involving a number of sale properties in New York State. And finally, I was negotiating a consent order agreement with the Department of Environmental Protection of Pennsylvania, having to do with the Clean Air Act and the petrochemical facility and flaring, where they flare basically excess gases, and flaring acts as a safety device. So that was just one day in my life. That was May 1. The thing I wanted to express, and I was listening to everybody here, is from my perspective, one of the things I love about practicing environmental law and doing these things is that, and I represent industry, obviously, but I also represent municipalities and counties, is that when someone comes to you with an issue, whatever it might be, the transaction or negotiating with the state, they have a problem. And you need to think about that as a lawyer, or if you're going to be a lawyer. Someone has a problem and they're coming to you to help them resolve that issue. And that should be taken very seriously by you, that someone is looking to you to help them. It's like, I'll just analogize it when you were, a kid, going to your teacher, your mom, I have a problem. Can you help me? How do I resolve this? So it's a really big, we'll just say burden, but at the same time, it can be amazingly rewarding to know that you're helping a client resolve some issue. So that's the thing I enjoy the most, is working with the clients and knowing that they're coming to me and they're trusting to me, hey, help me. I need help with this. How do we resolve this? How do I get this property sold, or how do I get this site cleaned up? And it's an ongoing process, because everybody on this panel will tell you anything having to do with environmental law is never like, it begins today and it ends tomorrow. It goes on forever. So that's the thing that I really enjoy about practicing. And like, all these activities have been going on for a while and they'll continue to go on. But just remember that when somebody comes to you, they have a problem and they're looking for you to help them.
I'll go next.
Yeah.
So I had so many different jobs that that typical day was different, but they had certain things in common. So that's kind of the way I thought about approaching it. So at EPA, and Eric can talk about whether it's the same at NOAA, we used to joke about the fact there is a conveyor belt of issues that are coming at you. So the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Superfund, the pesticides laws are loaded like with issues. Rulemakings that have been mandated, lawsuits that have resulted in something being remanded back to the agency, controversial permit issues that are coming up. There's just a conveyor belt. So every administration comes in and talks about what they're going to do, and then they get hit with the conveyor belt, which dictates what they really are going to work on. Laws expiring. I ended up working on Superfund 24/7 my first couple of years at EPA because that law had to get reauthorized. So that conveyor belt presents difficult and controversial issues. And at least at the level I was at in the agency, I spent a lot of time meeting with people who had or would be affected by those issues or those regulations. And the one thing I learned, and I actually learned it on Capitol Hill, is everybody has a voice and everybody has to be heard. And when you stop listening to people, two bad things happen and nothing good happens. The first bad things that happen are you don't really know where your allies are and where your adversaries are on an issue because you haven't listened to them. And the second one is, you learn a lot that maybe what you thought isn't actually what is. And so I spent a lot of time meeting with people, with corporations, with NGOs, a lot of time on the Hill talking to members of the Congress within the administration. Somebody once said the environmental laws are the most significant economic laws in America, and they are right because we affect every municipality, every company, and citizens every day. And so you gotta really factor all of that in to the decision making, starting back in the rulemaking making process. And you have to be sure, as a senior leader, that you really are getting all sides, even within the agency. EPA is not a monolith. People don't, and this is a good thing, they don't see all the issues the same way. So you have a lot of internal debate, and I think it makes for strong rulemaking. My time in corporate America in many ways was quite similar. I worked in companies that cared a lot about public policy. I worked in companies, you might not necessarily agree, but really did care about compliance, being in compliance. They were there to use science and innovation to bring products to America. Getting in compliance was something both companies felt was mandatory. Their business was to create and sell. Their business was not to pick fights with the community or to have plants that were in compliance. And so I had an opportunity in corporate America to really help shape what was our approach going to be on controversial issues. And those were, everything from biotechnology at Monsanto to climate change at DuPont. DuPont had, long before I got there, brought the substitutes had made CFCs. Montreal Protocol phased them out. They brought second, third, and I think they're now on a fourth generation of refrigerants and new chemistry that is significantly improved over what the CFCs were, right? And so how, as a part of that process, how does a company engage in a constructive way with government? I have watched a bit with horror to go from being the first sustainability officer to now finding the anti-ESG attitudes. I mean, how did it happen that Republicans in Congress are telling CEOs they don't know how to run their businesses? They used to tell CEOs, go run your business. Now they're telling them, don't go run your business. So in any event, I digress. But as a chief sustainability officer, I really had an opportunity at the highest levels in the company to say, these are controversial issues. Where are we going to be on them? Are we going to be part of developing solutions? Are we going to be fighting those solutions? And my background, more often than not, I could push the company in the right direction. So Again, very public policy oriented positions. And as I think everybody here will say, the environmental issues are what makes them interesting is their complexity and their importance to people. And I found that in both my time at EPA as well as my time in corporate America, and it's kind of the role I serve as an advisor when I'm on board. So
I can go maybe the different government perspective. And I'll say, you know, I'm still relatively new in my career, so I don't have the benefit of being able to look back over a long and accomplished stretch of work and talk about, you know, talk with that kind of a perspective. So maybe I'll try to just hone in on what the day-to-day kind of legal tasks that I work on are. And like others up here, my days are varied. I wouldn't say that there's any kind of typical day or thing that I do. And unfortunately or fortunately, I don't have to bill my time. So I couldn't look back.
Fortunately.
Fortunately, yeah. I don't live in
This is
6-minute
advantage for
increments.
government.
So I didn't have the benefit of a timesheet to look back on and see what I'd worked on. But I would say broadly, you know, the conveyor belt is a nice metaphor. My agency clients have a lot of priorities. There's a lot of things that they want to do. Sure, they come with problems that I have to help them resolve, but they also have kind of prospective things that they want to achieve. And I think my primary role is to help them achieve those goals, to help keep progress on the conveyor belt. I don't know how to work that metaphor in, but to do it in a way that's legally sufficient and complies with all of the web of laws that NOAA as a federal agency has to comply with. So, you know, on a given day, I can work on kind of short one-off projects. If a client wants to enter into a contract or an agreement with somebody else, whether another federal agency or an external party, to help achieve their mission, I help draft and review that agreement. If they need to respond to a FOIA request, I get involved and I help you know, identify responsive records, identify potential things to redact, help process the FOIA request. But I also get to work on kind of long-term programmatic projects. I mentioned that I work often with the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. They're in the process right now of designating 6 new sanctuaries across the country, and the lawyers in my office are very involved in those efforts. They're years-long processes, and you know, we're involved every step of the way, whether that's helping to draft or review the environmental planning documents that are required under NEPA, to ensure that there's compliance with statutes like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which NOAA implements, but also has to comply with, that kind of the rationales in the administrative documents and records that we're producing, you know, are strong enough to hold water under the standards of the Administrative Procedure Act, trying to ensure compliance and minimize litigation risk on these kind of long-term projects. Day to day, that can mean kind of focused review of big documents. I can spend all day sitting in my office reading an environmental impact statement. I can spend all day on calls with clients fielding questions that they had prepared me for or not prepared me for, and that come up in the moment. I spend time briefing people within my agency, whether on the policy side or kind of on the legal side, to help elevate things. And I spend time helping to represent my agency in either interagency forums, or I participated, for example, in a public meeting before the public. I also do some work with regulations, helping to draft and review them, but also sometimes we're asked by Congress to provide input on bills that are, you know, that relate to NOAA's mission. and are in committee. So with my clients, I work to provide, we call it technical drafting assistance to help mark up laws based on our experience implementing them. It's really varied work. There's a lot that goes on, and every day brings something new.
So I don't want to repeat, and Peg covered so much in her day. I do like maybe half. So,
I don't believe that.
but a typical day for me, it really does depend on the issues of that particular week, month. Litigation, you usually have a set schedule that everything needs to happen, so that'll dictate kind of what I'll be focusing my time on. So what I'll do instead is contrast my typical day right now versus when I was kind of more junior and associate with the firm, because it was a little bit cleaner back then. Then it was, researching, preparing memos or drafting up legal documents, for litigation, or reviewing documents. It was relatively straightforward. Every now and again, appear in court, not frequently. And as I got more senior and was dealing more directly with a lot of the clients that we work for, then it shifted and I spend a lot of my time, really most of my day in meetings, talking through issues, advising on strategy related to a project that's being developed and how they're going to approach concerns related to environmental justice issues or concerns related to citing. And then at the same time, jump to another call where we're talking about, a property that's being sold, and there's been, an assessment of the property, and what does that mean? And does additional investigation needed? And, what are the implications of doing the additional investigation? All of those tricky issues. And then if, there's very hotly contested litigation going on, it could just be kind of in the weeds, drafting, motions and responding to briefs. Or just talking to the client or opposing counsel and arguing with them about how we should resolve it. It really does vary. The only thing that's consistent is at the end of the day, I record my time. And it's the worst part of the day. No, I'm just kidding. But the variety is, again, I said it before, I think the beauty of it, but what you can pretty much guarantee is that you will spend a lot of time reading and you will spend a lot of time writing. So if you are interested in the law, whether you're doing what we do, whether it's a lawyer in general, that's going to be the vast majority of the time you spend, with certain exceptions. If you are in court every day, kind of working for like a prosecutor's office or public defender, they'll spend maybe 4 days out of the week just on their feet in court dealing with various things. But then they got to go back and do a ton of reading and still do a lot of writing too. So that'll color maybe your view, where your interest might lie.
Lot of overlap in my typical day with everything that's been said at a research and education institute like ELI. I think upfront, no 2 days are substantively the same. So there is always something that's changing. And the other thing is this is a really fast moving field, environmental law. And so you're always sort of trying to keep up or catch up with what's going on. So in terms of what I do in a typical day, practically I'm indoors, I'm in my office, and I'm at my computer. And I'm on my web browser and I'm on my Microsoft Word document, almost every day doing something. And what does the research and writing look like here at ELI? For example, this morning the research I was doing involved reading court cases. So I was reading a case relating to trespass on public lands in Wyoming. I was reading a case related to a climate case related to climate change. I was reading the sort of proposed changes to NEPA, the NEPA amendments in the new debt ceiling bill. So it can involve a lot of things. And I was also reading news, right? Trying to keep current, find out what's going on, see what developments are going on in environmental law. What does the writing look like here? It really ranges. So I was working on, just a couple days ago, I was working on a blog. So we have a blog here at ELI Vibrant Environment, sort of keeping track of what's going on in the fast moving world of environmental law. And that was on action that BLM had taken, a proposed rule related to sort of conservation and climate resilience on public lands. And that's for a general audience. I might also be working on a report, for example, on climate litigation for the Climate Judiciary Project that is aimed at state judges, judges in state courts. So writing for a much different audience. So it really varies. I also spend my time doing presentations, and that includes, for internally for staff on something like what the NEPA amendments look like, which I'll be doing this afternoon at one of our meetings, or engaging with folks like you who are interested in environmental law, or external partners who want to know about how a particular environmental law is going to affect an issue that they have. One of those things might be compensatory mitigation for the Clean Water Act, which I just did a presentation on a couple of weeks ago. So again, super varied. I think the other thing that, I don't think got mentioned, but that I do spend my time doing is just thinking. So environmental law is complicated. And I think it was you, Eric, who said the web of laws that are involved in environmental law, and it is really true. And so taking time to think and think creatively is an important part of our jobs as well.
Thank you all. And kind of going off of that, I think a lot of people go to law school thinking that they'll be in court every day, be litigating. So how many of you go to court and how often do you go?
I'll just start that one and say I never go to court. So a couple of the things that ELI doesn't do, we don't do any litigation. We don't have any clients like a typical law firm, and we don't go to Capitol Hill and do any lobbying either. So I've spent 3 years at ELI and 0 days in a courtroom.
Yeah. We occasionally get into state and federal court just because there are clients who feel that it's worthwhile pursuing litigation with respect to, usually it's a matter involving the cleanup of a contaminated site, because that's where there's a lot of money involved in terms of what it's going to take to remediate a site. So that's usually where you get involved. Could be a private party action where, a neighborhood or some citizens feel that somehow they've been impacted by the operations of a client that you work for, or it could be the government, or it could be another party that's suing you, that's trying to figure out how to whittle down their costs in terms of the allocation, what might be needed to remediate a site. So we do have those kind of cases. The one thing I'll say is that on the enforcement side, the one thing that I've learned and have stuck to throughout my entire practices, you really don't want to argue with the government in terms of like going to court. You want to settle your cases. So that's one of the things that we do. We do a lot of enforcement work, all across the country. And usually those are the cases that you want to sit down with the government. You want to understand exactly what they think that you did in terms of violations and how to resolve it. So it's not a court action, but it can feel like that just because there's a lot of what we say discussion and negotiation over interpretation of laws. But when it comes to environmental cases, the other thing that I have learned over the years is that typically trying to present an environmental issue to a jury or to a judge with respect to amazingly complicated laws, which environmental laws are, your chances of winning are not high. I mean, it is tough to try to explain. And I'll just give you an example. Years ago, when I was involved in a court action, when I was at another law firm, we were representing an airline, and it had to do with the shipment of hazardous materials. And hazardous materials, for those of you who don't know, are basically products. Hazardous material has a definition under the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act, which essentially is a Department of Transportation responsibility. But in any event, some hazardous materials, it was a pesticide that went on a plane, wasn't supposed to be on a passenger aircraft, was supposed to be on in a cargo aircraft. Anyway, somehow somebody tried to get it on a passenger aircraft. It basically fell all over the tarmac and everybody was trying to clean it up. And this company got pursued by the United States Attorney's Office. And that was one time I remember where the firm I was working with, we decided like, you know what, we need to try to pursue this in court in terms of defending ourselves because we didn't really do anything. The passenger basically submitted this to the agent, ticket agent, and they just put it on the plane. Nobody knew that it was pesticide. So we actually did one of those mock jury trials, and I just remember that the result was we lost our shirts. I mean, and we just knew we had to try to resolve this with the government in some way. But that's one good example I can give you with respect to environmental cases. And I would say in my younger days, when I was at DOJ, of course, you do go to court, whether it be trial court or appellate court.
I don't go to court. DOJ litigates for me. If my agency clients are sued, DOJ is the goes actually into court for us. But my office does work closely with the Department of Justice when our agency clients are involved in litigation. So even though we don't go into the courtroom ourselves, we will review, provide input on, and sometimes even draft or assist in the drafting of filings or motions that go to court, primarily to make sure that the statutes that our clients implement are characterized, correctly and in a way that aligns with their kind of priorities and goals. Because while DOJ is the expert when it comes to motion practice and whether to move to dismiss or go to summary judgment or whatever, they may not spend a lot of time with especially the more esoteric laws like the Coastal Zone Management Act. So we assist, just in making sure all the filings hold water. Something else that I do, which I didn't expect to do, is have a role in administrative appeals or proceedings for administrative law judges within the agency. So I kind of always thought of litigation as occurring in courts with judges and juries or no juries, but kind of like the traditional Article 3 federal court or a state court. But there are some things that are decided by administrative law judges within agencies, which can then be appealed to the more traditional courts. But for example, NOAA has an Office of Law Enforcement that has the authority to enforce violations of things like the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So somebody is fishing in violation of one of the fishery management provisions that's applicable to them. NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement can issue them a citation, seek a fine, or even bring them into an administrative law judge proceeding. So there are attorneys in my office who basically act like prosecutors for the Office of Law Enforcement. I'm not one of those people, that's not the work that I do, but sometimes if those cases are appealed, they can be appealed either to the NOAA administrator or to somebody like the general counsel of NOAA. And my office, and I've done this a couple times, kind of acts as a law clerk for the agency decision maker. So unlike the prosecutor or the defender, we don't kind of make an argument on one side or another, but we look at the briefing that the parties have submitted, analyze it, assess it under the governing law, and then make a recommendation to and potentially brief the decision maker, whether that's the administrator or some deputy. It's a really interesting part of my work, again, that I didn't expect, and I don't think fits into kind of the traditional litigation framework that you might think of when you think of lawyering.
So the path not taken. When I went to law school, I thought I'd be a litigator and ended up at U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where I had the opportunity over the course of my career to testify in front of Congress probably 40 or 50 times. And at the first one, testifying, when you're from EPA and you testify in front of Congress, it's quite controversial because the Democrats don't think you've done enough and the Republicans hate you. And so I I go up and I sat there and I thought to myself, so this is my form of litigating in front of a jury, in front of a judge, but it's taking a different form. It's a controversial issue in front of Congress. So at EPA and at in corporate America, I was never in court, but I do think those testimonies are about as close as I could come to having the moot court experience, but in a different branch of government.
I might actually suggest that might be a little bit more difficult, honestly, than what I do. So I go to court a lot, just not physically. So I'm constantly filing things with the court, constantly communicating with the court, but actually appearing in front of the judge. And these days too, with modern technology and ability to do things remotely, I'm actually physically present in court much less than I used to be. Really, it comes up for my practice in really one of three contexts. So if litigation where you have enforcement, which Peg's already told you is always going to be a bad idea to try to kind of fully litigate that in most instances. So even if there is litigation that gets filed, you're working on trying to, let's resolve this, because if we have to go in front of a judge or a jury, it's probably not going to be great trying to explain it. But also in the context of citizen suits. So, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, all those statutes have provisions that allow individual citizens to sue for violations of those laws, particularly if they believe that the agency responsible is not acting sufficiently, right? So when that occurs, it's similar to an enforcement action, but it's an individual who's suing. So I will be involved in defending that in terms of showing why they were complying with their permit, or whatever other issue gets addressed. And kind of tangentially related to that, there are just tort suits in general where people are essentially alleging some kind of common law claim related to trespass or nuisance or things of that nature. Sometimes class action, it just varies depending on the type of issue. And so we'll be in court litigating those issues as well. And really the last, so I said three, I guess there's four. The last kind of example is business disputes, right? Where you could be working with a vendor and they somehow mishandle something. And so there's an environmental component to whatever went wrong in the contract, or they were installing or constructing something and didn't follow the necessary regulations, or I'm defending someone who was alleged to have not followed the necessary regulations. It really just depends. But all of those circumstances wind up with me being in state or federal court, or in some instances in front of administrative bodies. So the variety is nice, but generally speaking, I'm still not physically in court except for very, not unique, but I'd say limited circumstances. So if the judge basically wants an argument over a motion, so you appear to make the argument. Trial, which in the private sector, that's almost always an effort to avoid if you can, because it's so unpredictable how a jury may decide things. And usually I can't even count the number of times that I've gotten to the day of picking a jury or the day before the trial, and finally everyone just says, hey, let's not do this, we should settle, and it all goes away. But I have actually gone through and had trial, and just like the clients feel, it was very unpredictable, sometimes successful, sometimes not, and the reasons for it can be things that you would never even anticipate, even though you thought you had this great story to tell and you had these experts that were going to explain all these complicated scientific issues, and all those things flew right over their head, and the only thing they focused on was that first thing that they heard on like day one of testimony, where someone said, well, this person ignored that they were supposed to do X, Y, and Z on this day. And it's like, well, that person did that, but no, I won't get into it. Anyway, that's kind of the extent, I should say, of the court appearances for me.
Another thing that can really vary in environmental law is clients, whether you have clients, what type of clients you have, how much you're doing with them. So how many of you all have clients, and what are ways that you help your client? First.
Well, it's a quick and easy one. Yeah, we don't have clients, so pretty straightforward. I don't worry about trying to help clients. But I mean, sometimes at ELI, we talk about sort of the environment being our client. And so, we're always sort of trying to do the best, obviously, research that we can for the environment, but we don't have clients in a typical sense.
Well, I have a lot of different types of clients. I have what you would consider the typical industrial clients, chemical companies, refineries, manufacturers, both domestic and international. But then we also have clients that are municipalities and counties. We have real estate developers. We have just individuals that have issues. You'd be surprised how many just people, mom and pops who have an issue with an above ground tank or an underground storage tank because someone delivering fuel oil did something inappropriate. So we have a lot of those clients too. So the clients really vary, but I would say for the most part, they're either companies or they're either developers, or they might be private equity funds as well, because we do a lot of transactions at our firm in environmental law. And when you do transactions, typically what you're doing is you're representing someone either buying or selling an asset, or buying or selling membership shares or stock shares in a company, or buying or selling property. So that really does vary in terms of who actually comes in the door on those deals. And we also represent a lot of lenders as well. So a lot of the big banks, in terms of, when they loan money, they want to make sure that whoever they're loaning money to is complying with environmental laws. So the credit agreements are written up such that, there's an obligation to comply with the law. And one thing that, just going back, I wanted to point this out, Linda mentioned this, and you were mentioning about your former companies that you work with, is that one of the things about industry that you may not be aware of, because, not trying to politicize anything here, but in terms of where you sit on the fence, most of industry that comes to us, again, with a problem, it has to do with trying to understand how to comply with environmental law. So Roy mentioned, for example, compliance counseling, and Linda mentioned that, the clients really are trying to comply. So a lot of what we do with respect to industry and manufacturers, wherever they might be across the country, they're trying to understand, well, I see this in the Clean Air Act. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to do this, or I want to modify my permit. What do I need to do? So there's a huge undertaking by a lot of people in a company that come to us and are trying to figure out, okay, I'm trying to figure out how I comply with this statute or this regulation, because from their perspective, there's so many laws out there and regulations, they don't want to miss anything, but they're not sure exactly how to include an environmental compliance program to achieve compliance. So a lot of times that's why they're coming to us. I just wanted to emphasize that I know sometimes everybody thinks, well, industry's bad, but that from my perspective, what I'm seeing, the most part is somebody coming to me and saying, I don't know how to comply with this. Could you tell me exactly what I need to do? Or they might say, I need to report something to the government because I have violated the law. How do I go about reporting, sitting down with EPA or state government, explaining to them what happened, and then trying to pursue corrective action? So just want to throw that out there.
Interesting. I do work with clients every day. My client agency is NOAA, like I've been talking about. And I think maybe something that's unique or interesting about government service, at least compared to the private sector, is that my clients, one, never change. I always have the same client. And two, their legal counsel never changes, so they can't fire me. And I would say kind of, I talked about my day-to-day, I think a little bit in the last part, but at a big picture level, everything that I do is client driven. Everything that I do is in response to something that my clients want to do. And like I said before, I think my job is to help them implement the things that they want to do in a legally sufficient way. So that, includes compliance, maybe in a different way than in the private sector, but making sure that they comply with all the federal laws that they have to comply with as they do things. Helping minimize their litigation risk as they do things. And helping them interpret their own authority. So not only the things that they have to comply with, but also like what is it that they're able to do? How far does the law go? How broad is their authority under a given statutory provision? So I work really closely with my clients. And it's something I really enjoy.
So I only practiced for 2 years, but I think following on Peg's point, a lot of it is problem solving. The easy stuff, companies can do themselves. They've got a lot of very good engineers, unless they're small and then they need outside counsel to help them. But it's also, how do I solve kind of unique problems? Clean Air Act's gonna make me put very expensive control devices on 4 of my facilities, but one of them I'm gonna close down in 3 or 4 years. So do I really have to invest? Is there a way we can negotiate some other, can I put more restrictive controls on the 3 plants we're gonna keep operational and let the other one go? I mean, what's creative problem solving that we can be a part of with the agencies? And inside the companies I was with, things, you can have a well-run, very strong compliance program and things can go wrong. People can make bad decisions, checking the bag with the pesticide at the passenger, right? Or or things happen. And how do you go in and fix it as quickly as, I want to say as cost effectively as possible? Because again, most companies, I hate to generalize everybody, most companies are in business to do something and compliance is a part of that. So if something goes wrong, they actually do want to fix it quickly, keep their reputation and brand out of the headlines. And as counsel, either inside or in private practice, you're really looking for people who can give you advice on how to get past this mountain so you can get on doing what you really want to do.
So I think Peg kind of entirely covered almost every single client that we work with. So what I'll add, because I don't want to repeat, is just in addition to, kind of the initial problem solving where someone has a problem and they come to you, a lot of times what we do now is anticipate, right?
Mm-hmm.
What direction, I think Jared mentioned before how, this is a very dynamic area. There's always some new regulation. The science is always improving. Now they can detect the contaminant at this level. And what does that mean for, application of whatever particular law you're looking at? And so, can you basically let a client know, look, this may be coming down the pike. You want to consider how this will impact your operations. Here are some initial thoughts of how that might work. And then sometimes, they're right ahead, they're, way ahead of you. Like, yes, we thought about this and we're doing X, Y, and Z. Or other times they're like, oh, we need to sit down and figure out how we're going to handle this. Or the administration is changing and there may be different priorities. And are we shored up in the right areas to make sure that our compliance program is still going to consistently be applied in a way that's not going to get any, crosshairs, right? The other client base that I'll highlight, and Peg mentioned them, is the municipalities. They're a little bit, and I'd probably add utilities into that equation too, but they're a little bit unique to some of the industry clients that we work with, in the sense that many of the industry clients, they have products or services that they're putting together and they're offering to the public. Whereas with municipalities, a lot of times what you're dealing with is government organizations, government bodies that are kind of charged with providing for the citizens that live within that area, essential functions, right? Drinking water, for example, right? And so you end up with all of these clients having to think about, just beyond what the law says and what the regulations require, the impacts of all of those interpretations of the law, all of the implementations of the law, and the consequences of that can vary pretty widely, but you always have to be thinking about what is unique about this particular client that I should be factoring into, because it's not enough to just say, here's what the Clean Water Act says, here's what the regulations say, and here's what that case says. But we have to go through this process of talking with them about, here's what that means for you and for those that you serve or those that you work with. And so that's the nice part of having such a broad base of clients, honestly. But I think with any client relationship, that's kind of what is entailed in that process.
We'll go to audience questions in a few minutes here, but with our last couple of questions that we've prepared, I wanted to touch on some more advice related questions. So most of our audience today, as I said earlier, is students and young professionals who are just starting their career journeys in environmental law, or even just considering a career in environmental law. So what's one thing that you wish you had known about environmental law when you were just starting to practice?
How friendly everyone is and how approachable they are and how willing people are to help you if you have a question or you want advice. I think there's sort of an intimidation factor when you're trying to break into a new field or you're trying to sort of find out if you're interested in something. And really, I think to a person, everyone that I've approached, in the past several years about some question of environmental law, career related question, have absolutely been supportive and willing to talk and give advice and share their perspective. And so, just knowing that early on, I think would have been even more helpful to me. So, yeah.
I wish I had taken several science courses.
Yeah.
I didn't, and environmental law, there's a lot of technology involved in practicing environmental law, and we've all been talking about it. So I didn't take really many science courses in college or undergraduate. And I'm basically learning on the job. I mean, now there's a lot of things that I know, but again, if I could go back in time, I would have taken many more science courses. And that's one thing that I really regret that I did not do.
It's funny to hear that, because what I was gonna say is, I had a big chip on my shoulder coming into this field, not having a science background, and it's something that really made me nervous, preoccupied me as I was going into the job market. But I have been relieved to find that I don't think it's a big impediment, or has been a big impediment to me as I've been starting my career. There are certainly things that I don't understand, and maybe it would have been helpful to have taken some biology in college. But I think Roy said towards the beginning, I think part of the job is translating the science for the public, I'm not before judges very often or ever, but trying to take the work that the scientists are doing and make it something that's intelligible to the broader public. And I think I'm able to fill that role just with like a willingness to learn. And like I said, I don't think it's really held me back to not have had a science background.
I have two things that I wish I'd known maybe. Number one is nothing in the environmental area is quite as black or white as people want to make it to be. The laws are complex, the issues are complex, the science does not give you an answer. The science leads you in a direction, it takes you close, but there's a reason why scientists shouldn't really make all the decisions, because there's so many other things that influence. And that gets to my second point. The law only gets you so far. As I said earlier, environmental laws affect every business, every city, every town, every person. And if you're a company or an environmental group or a municipality, you've got to be in compliance and on the right side of the law, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee you what I call the freedom to operate. You've really got to understand where the community's coming from, the people are coming from, the diversity of wherever you're operating. In many cases, kind of the larger political arena that you're playing in. And so you really, as a lawyer, I think the best lawyers understand the law. They understand, I'll say, the guardrails where the law takes you. But I don't think I appreciated how much all the other influencers were going to either open doors or close doors for either my clients or when I was at EPA or when I was at the company. And I think the ability to understand those other forces or those other influencers is really critical, and even more so as you all go forward in your career, because the internet makes everybody an expert, and it is very hard for people to understand who's got good science and who doesn't have good science. And as a lawyer, you're really influencing people, not just again about the law, but how to navigate all of that.
Wow. So I was going to say something very similar to what Linda said, but she said it better than I would have been able to. So I'm going to pick it different. So one thing that I wish I had known or understood or fully appreciated was just how broadly the variety that there is that exists in terms. When you say the term environmental, everyone has an initial thought that comes in their mind of what that means. And it doesn't matter who that person is, they're missing probably 90% of what environmental law actually includes. If I had understood that earlier, I would have approached getting involved in environmental law a little bit different. Fortunately, it wasn't a total waste of time, because I stumbled around for a bit and then realized, oh, I can do a little bit of a lot of different things. So it worked out well. But if I'd understood it earlier, I'd have been able to more easily identify the things that were most interesting to me, the things that were most challenging, and really dig in. And even though I said I wasn't going to say the thing that Linda did, I wanted to add one other point, because I didn't appreciate this fully until after doing the work, and particularly the EJ work, for quite some time. When you do a lot of litigation and it involves, like I said, money back and forth, whatever, it's however you want to interpret that contract, you're a lawyer, you can find all kinds of ways to justify why it should be, viewed that way. The same thing can be applied to laws, the same thing can be applied to regulations. So that's why the law only gets you so far, right? But once you start factoring in like public policy, once you start factoring in impacts to business, impacts to individuals, then it makes you better able to come up with solutions that will be meaningful for you, but also still respect the perspectives of others who might be opposed to it. And one of the most difficult challenges that I've faced with litigating in general, or just in dealing with negotiating an issue, is encountering individual people who don't appreciate or understand that everything is much more complex. I will caution everyone from kind of zeroing in on one particular outcome or viewpoint of how things are supposed to work, because what you will do, even if you get what you want, you're probably going to harm someone else and not even have known that you did it. And in the environmental justice context, that is a major challenge that I deal with, where you'll have groups that are very focused on the climate, that are very focused on, protecting, conserving lands, right? And they'll engage with industry to say, you need to shut down this facility that's providing power to 100,000 people. And you haven't offered any alternative for how they're going to get electricity or how they're going to get the other resources that they need. You just know that you don't like this facility because its emissions don't align with what you think it should be. Now, maybe those emissions should be reduced, and we should talk about ways to do that. But if the only thing that you think the solution is shut that facility down, you're not thinking about the actual impacts of what you're doing. And if that's how you approach it, then you're going to end up with suboptimal solutions.
I'll ask one more question and then turn it over to the audience. So the last one is a lot of people ask us about mentorship. So what role did mentorship play in your legal journey so far, and how can law students and new lawyers find mentors along the way?
So mentorship got me to where I am today. As I described during my initial sort of how did I get to environmental law, I would not have gone to law school had it not been for a mentor at the University of Maryland who first sort of put it in my ear as something that might be of interest to me. And that mentorship relationship developed over time with me sort of just going and asking a lot of questions and being interested. And we built up a dialogue over time, and I managed to go to law school. And then after law school and during law school, my relationship with my professor, Rob Glicksman, who sort of really helped me understand what it means to be an environmental lawyer, what are the opportunities that I might be able to take advantage of as an environmental lawyer, and then was instrumental in sort of helping me find my place at ELI. And again, similarly, it was just sort of me driving those interactions, going, talking, establishing relationships, and sort of what can you do? You're already doing it by coming to something like this today and learning about what types of careers are environmental law and asking us questions. But it also goes to my answer to the previous question, which is just don't be afraid to reach out to people. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone who is doing work that you think is interesting and just sending them an email or giving them a phone call and just saying, hey, what you're doing is really cool and I'd love to talk to you about it. People like to talk about what they do. Mm-hmm. So if someone here is you're interested, chances are they'll be happy to talk to you and help you. So don't be afraid and just go for it.
I had a mentor when I was at Department of Justice. I really didn't have any other mentor, but this person I know that you know, or Ann Shields.
Close friend.
Yeah, Ann was someone that she was a assistant section chief when I went there in the group that I was in, and she really made sure that when I came into DOJ, because I had not been practicing at that time, coming from Gulf Oil, even though I have my law degree, that I was exposed to a wide variety of practice areas in terms of environmental law, ability to assist with trial work, appellate work, work on the Hill, policy work. So she really made sure that she took the time and effort to expose me to everything as much as she could, because she was a very busy person in terms of running the section that she was running. But I would say that she really helped me significantly in terms of expanding my interest in practicing environmental law. And then on actually you all trying to reach out to mentor, the one thing I think that you're finding here is that probably everybody sitting here on this panel loves the practice of law, and especially environmental law. And that's the person, whoever, I mean, it could be any one of us that you can reach out to after this program, but if you find somebody that's interested in the practice of law, whether it's environmental law or not, and you're interested in practicing law, that's the person who I think can be really your best mentor, somebody that loves to practice law. And some people go into law school and decide like, hey, this isn't for me, and drop out, first or second year. Other people graduate and then decide it's not for them. But somebody like me who's doing it for a long time, that I must love the practice of law. I'm sitting here doing it forever. So I would just say that, yeah, find somebody that loves the practice of law, no matter how long they've been practicing. And that person is going to be a great mentor. They don't have to be in your firm, in your company, in your neighborhood, in whatever organization you are. You can just reach out to people. I think you're exactly right that people that love the practice of law, whatever area of law it is, love to talk to upcoming students and associates and somebody interested in practicing law about what it's all about. Because the one thing, again, I'll just go back to this, that I find it immensely rewarding is that you're helping somebody with a problem. And it can be unbelievably rewarding, even if you don't get the result you wanted, or they wanted, you did your best. And that can really make you feel good inside that, okay, I tried, or I achieved my objective. So I would say find that mentor, but it doesn't have to be in your organization. It can be somebody outside. It can be any one of us.
Yeah, I'll second everything that Peg and Jared said. I found people to be very welcoming and generous with their time. So I'd encourage you to reach out to folks whose work you find interesting, especially ones who seem passionate about it. I'll say in my own experience, at least in law school, and since then, people who I consider to have kind of a mentor-mentee relationship with are all people that I've worked with. I found it really hard to approach professors and go to office hours and talk to them and get advice that way. I mentioned that I had some clinical experience in law school, and I think in the process, of working in the clinics, I was able to really build relationships with the clinical staff and the clinical directors. And those were really valuable, helpful relationships for me as I was thinking about kind of what the field was and what a career in environmental law could be. And I'd say the same thing about the folks who I worked with during my internships. I really did find that just kind of working relationships built into the best mentor relationships for me. And that doesn't mean that's how it is for everybody. I would encourage you to find mentors wherever and however you can.
I think mentors have been critically important to my career. But I'm going to throw another term on the table called sponsors. So I think particularly if you enter into a new organization, you need to find, mentors, people that can kind of help you navigate, learn the new who's who to stay away from, who to really understand, and can help you figure out how to handle difficult circumstances, difficult personalities, and that sort of stuff. And they may or may not also be sponsors. Sponsors to me are somebody who knows you, knows your strengths, and is willing to open a door and shove you through it. And when I look at how I kind of came up both in my career at EPA and even in corporate America, it was really having somebody who could open doors I didn't know needed to be opened or should be open, and had the confidence in me to push me through the door and say I can do it. And so that kind of sponsor role, I think, is as important as a mentor. And sometimes they can be the same person, but sometimes they're very different people. And I'd encourage you to look at both.
So I agree with that 1000%. My career would not even exist if not for a couple of key sponsors, but also a number of mentors who helped me navigate. I was terrible, really, for the first few years of my career in actively seeking or taking advantage of mentoring opportunities that were available to me. And what I quickly learned after a year or two of stumbling around is that no person is an island. I'm sure all of you are incredibly intelligent, hardworking, all of that great stuff. That will not be sufficient to get you where you want to be wherever you go, because everything's relationship based, right? The opportunities that you learn about, the information that you gain access to that everyone else may not know about, that will help you maneuver in a way or find the opportunity that fits what you want to do. That all comes from relationship. So I echo everything they said in terms of actually reaching out to people, and don't be shy about it. You know, don't email someone and say, hey, please will you be my mentor? I mean, that's a little awkward, but people still will likely respond. But instead, showing that curiosity about what they do, that's how you just start that process of them getting to know you better, you getting to know them and what they do. And that's a relationship they can develop. And also the one thing that I would highlight is don't underestimate the value of the relationships you have with your peers, because what they do is they know other people, they have other mentors, and you can actually be, you know, expanding potential mentors for yourself through the relationships you have with people you're already in class with. Maybe that person has a great relationship with a particular professor and can say, oh, you're interested in this, you should really talk to this person, and that professor can then expose you to other opportunities. And so, you know, one thing that people, particularly early on in careers, have a tendency to do is kind of identify like that person that's at the very, very top, you know, that runs the company, that is like the general counsel of the organization, things like that, and then say, I'm gonna go find that person and make that person my mentor, which totally fine, but there's all kinds of different people along the way who are in very different roles and different capacities that are doing really interesting things and are great people that you can meet and that you can learn from, and that who could turn into a sponsor for you, for example. And so, you know, everything that everyone said, I think is great. And I think, you know, making sure you're intentional about trying to reach out to people. And this panel is a perfect example. And I'm sure you'll, you know, hear from other people over the course of summer school. When people say, reach out if you have questions about X, Y, and Z, take them up on that, because they do want to hear from you and be helpful to you in some way. And even the ones who don't say it, if they're doing something interesting, reach out to them too. And also don't be afraid to follow up either. I mean, people are incredibly busy, and sometimes the timing of that email coming in might have been while I was like right in the middle of doing a whole bunch of things and I meant to respond to the email and just forgot. Send a little follow-up note, you know, a week or so later, and say, oh yeah, I meant to respond to that, you know, that kind of thing. And then we can find a time to chat, and next thing you know, we're on our way. So yeah, reach out, follow up, and you know, think broadly about who can be a mentor and who can provide, you know, give you opportunities to be a mentor. And also the last thing, I keep going on here because this is a big thing for me, because like I said, I wouldn't be anywhere in my career without mentors and sponsors. But also when you're thinking about having that relationship, also think about, you know, you have something that you bring of value to the table too. How could you be, you know, helpful to, or, you know, expose someone to something interesting that they might not even be thinking about. Like they can mentor you, but they can learn from you too. Sometimes it's just additional perspective. Sometimes it's, you know, you're doing something that that person hasn't actually been familiar with, and now you can expose them to, you know, something that they can explore further. And so it doesn't have to be a one-way street either. You actually do bring something unique and significant to the table as well, which is part of the reason why people will invest and, you know, want to put that time into.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn things over to the audience now. So our educational programming intern Grace is going to bring a microphone around so that anyone watching back later can still hear your questions. So question, I guess I'll look back first.
Yeah, so I have a question. I'm kind of late career in environmental and cultural resource compliance. And cultural resources was something that hasn't really been included in the conversation so far. Do you see a place for that in historic properties and cultural resources in the environmental law sector?
Yeah, I would say absolutely representing companies that are interested in developing property. We run across issues all the time having to do with conducting archaeological surveys and trying to understand where there might be historic artifacts and what do we need to do to, to comply with respect to the National Historic Preservation Act, and then also State Historic Preservations Act. So we do run across that all the time. And in fact, I had a matter that I settled last year with a community group that was concerned about a college, happened to be a college in Philadelphia, who was expanding its entranceway. And there was some concern that there might be some revolutionary artifacts or old Indian artifacts in that area. So we followed up, I mean, in terms of, getting somebody to do the archaeological survey and understand what impacts there might be. Same thing in Philadelphia with it was supposed to be a casino that was built on the Delaware River. And there was a big issue about whether or not that area of the Delaware River was actually, what would you say, at the time during the Revolution War, whether it was river, whether it was land. So that generated a whole lot of activity in terms of archaeological surveys and what Indian artifacts or cultural resources might be there, revolutionary artifacts. So it definitely comes up in that aspect. That's how I've seen it in terms of development. Yeah.
I would say it comes up in my
Yeah.
practice a lot too. A couple of the program offices that I work with, their missions include cultural heritage and conservation, especially of cultural resources. So with the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, they have a couple sites that are devoted specifically to maritime cultural heritage, like there's a sanctuary around the wreck of the Monitor. They're in the process of designating one in Lake Ontario to help preserve and conserve a number of historic shipwrecks. Like Peg mentioned, I think you mentioned the National Historic Preservation
Right.
Act. A lot of the compliance work that I do with my clients has to do with making sure we're fulfilling the obligations under that statute whenever they have a federal undertaking, to consult with I hate acronyms. Yeah, so loop in the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. And I think that brings up another thing too, which is that I work often with tribal nations, either, in helping my agency clients fulfill their obligations to consult with recognized tribes whenever they take an action that could affect that tribe's interest, or as partners for a number of things. And those conversations often involve cultural heritage issues.
I was just wondering if you, from your experience, you mentioned not having necessarily the science background and wanting science background in some capacity or translating science. And if you had any commentary on maybe seeing scientists transition into more of the policy and law positions, given that you're not scientists, but working with them.
So I don't know the exact numbers, but I have a sizable number of partners in my firm who are scientists. So they're the people I actually call and say, so I have this issue. I have no idea what this engineer is saying. Can you join this call? And they talk and they speak in whatever engineering language. Someone was a marine biologist, this other person was a hydrogeologist, all those kinds of things. So the transition, I would say, at least in terms of private practice environmental law, I mean, it's in some ways you have a bit of a leg up as long as you're interested in working in the area that you have the science background in, but also just the exposure to the science in general. You're going to have to spend a lot less time than I do to get up to speed on what those issues are. And so it's a really great benefit, I think. You know, it may be different in other circumstances, but at my firm, I mean, as soon as, you know, we even see a resume, like, okay, we need to talk to them because there's so much value in having people that you can quickly call that have that background that can help, you know, drill down an issue or talk, like I said, to the engineers who are not lawyers, so they're not going to be thinking about things in the same way that you are and speak the same language that they speak to help them understand either, you know, yes, this is what compliance means. No, I understand that you do X, Y, and Z this way and the reason you do it, but the law requires us to do this additional thing. Here's what that translates to in terms of what your processes are. So yeah, it does translate, definitely.
I would add that at ELI, we've got a couple of PhD scientists on our staff. And as Roy mentioned, you know, we need you. We need the scientists and the science. So we have a PhD climatologist who works on the Climate Judiciary Project, who is essential in helping us understand issues of climate science, how the science is arising in the cases. And he is a go-to resource for us in answering questions about science topics. Yeah, that's just to say that you are needed, and with a demonstrated interest in policy, it's a really sort of critical piece. Yeah.
Time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you. I'd first like to thank all of you for coming and sharing today. I think I speak for everyone when I say that your insights were very helpful. I just wanted to ask a quick question about getting more exposure into the field of environmental law. As a pre-law student, law school is a little far away from me, and I realize a lot of you kind of figured your way into the field of environmental law during or even after law school. How do you recommend that students like me or people who have yet to attend law school kind of get experience working with environmental lawyers and just in the field?
I think one of the things that you could do is there's a lot of, every neighborhood has it, you know, there's a local citizens group that might be involved in environmental laws, environmental compliance, or non-governmental organizations, you know, environmental organizations that usually I'm on the other side of. I would definitely recommend that, you know, like the Sierra Club or Center for Biological Diversity, other groups that NRDC that you could reach out to that would probably love to have some interns or somebody coming in trying to assist them with case review. So there's tons of groups out there. Both local groups have never been heard of, and then there's also national organizations. That would be one way of doing it. There may also be law firms. I'm not thinking big law firms, but maybe smaller law firms where there might be an environmental practice or a land use development practice that might be interested in having somebody come in and just assisting, you know, over the summer months in terms of whether or not it's evaluating again, you know, cases or, you know, pulling out cases or trying to read documents, review them, evaluate them in terms of, you know, where the litigation's going. And I'm not saying you're practicing lawyer, but they might need that help. So, but I would definitely say the environmental organizations would probably be a really good place to start.
Adding that ELI has internships during each school semester and during the summer.
For non-lawyers?
Oh, yeah, no,
For non-law
for
students?
undergraduates.
Good.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Mhm.
Also our events, we have a lot of events that are open to the public and do a lot of things. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off this session now, but our speakers will be around for a few more minutes if you'd like to ask them your questions one-on-one, or if you'd like to network. But thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you to our wonderful speakers for giving us their time today. We so appreciate it. For the folks in our audience, please do join us for our next summer school sessions each Thursday through June and July. Next week's will be on REFA and the ESA.
It was nice to
You can find all of our summer school sessions.
Thanks, Johnny.
So good. I wish I attended this when I was-
Probably about
Yeah.
20.
This particular.